The federal government is set to generate 298.4 billion naira in revenue from sale of certain government assets in 2024. This is contained in a breakdown of the 2024 appropriation bill. The component listed as financing item was in the sectoral allocation details released by the chairman, Senate Committee on Appropriations, Solomon Adeola. The move, we understand, is believed to be an attempt at financing public debts as well as reducing the fiscal burden on the part of the federal government. The document also indicated that the government expects to generate 2.8 trillion naira from government-owned enterprises as a net surplus in the 2024 fiscal year. While funding is evidently a critical aspect of budget implementation, concerns have trailed moves by governments to put up public assets for sale. Is this a step in the right direction, given Nigeria's prevalent economic circumstances? I'm Uyad with a delight to Business Point. I'm joined virtually via Zoom from the nation's capital, Abuja, by Eze Oyenkperi, Executive Director, Center for Justice. Eze, we say a big thank you to you for making our time to join us on Business Points here on Global Television.
My pleasure.
Incidentally, it will appear we don't have audio from our guest this morning. We hope he can turn on his audio so we can hear him, and then we can have a two-way audio channel. But once we're able to reconnect with him, we'll get the discussion on the road for you on the program this morning.
My pleasure. Can you hear me?
Fix that audio problem, and we'll back shortly. Okay, so I was just going to, yes, thank you once again for joining us this morning. So we're going to jump right to it. I'm not so sure what your position is or what your assessment would be regarding the budget for 2024 as proposed, particularly when you look at two elements, the components around recurrent and, of course, capital expenditure.
Well, let me start by saying that the 2024 budget proposals is more or less a continuation of the norm of budgeting that we have witnessed over the years. What you see on paper in terms of the relationship between capital and recurrent may be a little bit misleading, because at the end of the year, based on experience, it is not what is written on the paper that is approved by the National Assembly that eventually happens in terms of implementation. Let me put this in context. There is a first line charge of the statutory expenditure, money going to National Assembly, UBEC, INEC, NJC, and similar agencies. They must be fully released. The second one is that we must pay our debts. We already have a bad rating. So if for any reason we default, it will be like a 0 point. So we must pay our debts. The third one is that salaries must be paid. Otherwise, you see workers on the streets, they'll be on strike. And of course, overheads need to be drawn down to run the affairs of the administration so that government does not shut down. It is only when you have finished these expenditures that you can now into capital. So you could have 10%, 15, 20% capital, but at the end of the day, in terms of implementation, you may get less than 5%. For instance, in the 2023 budget implementation, the report from the Honorable Minister of Budget and National Planning indicates that as September, we've simply done just 25%. That was how much has been released. Now, if you prorate that going towards the end of the year, at the most, we may do 35, 40. So in essence, yes, what you see on paper may not be actually what will be implemented at the end of the day. But even beyond that, what we have in terms of recurring non-debt, servicing of debts, they are quite humongous when you compare them to the amount of money that is dedicated for capital expenditure. And what you even call capital expenditure may not be, it evokes memories of projects that will be done for the benefit of the people, for the common masses in education, health, housing, roads, bridges, electricity. But that may not really be the case because capital expenditure is divided into two. You have administrative capital, which is like the cars, the renovation of houses for the president and similar officers, and computers and all those things that is used to run the bureaucracy to make sure that government continues operating, in the hope that if you provide them for the bureaucrats and the elected officials or the appointed ones, that they will now become more effective in service delivery to the people. That's one component, which is quite a huge part of this budget. And the other component is developmental capital. That's where you talk about roads, bridges, and other infrastructure that will help in improved service delivery for the improvement of the living conditions and standards of the average Nigerian. So in essence, if you look at it, the budget is a continuation of the norm. And come to think of it, we are discussing 27.5 trillion. If you convert that into dollars at the prevailing rate of about 750, you are going to have not more than $36 billion. $36 billion for about 220 million Nigerians, you are discussing roughly about $166 per person, which is not more than 125,000 naira per capita. Even if you were to add the budget of states and local governments, it will not amount to much. But when you compare it with the votes or budgets of countries like South Africa, Egypt, Algeria, South Africa, with a population of about 60 million, budgeting over 100 billion, or Egypt with a population of about 109 million, budgeting close to 100 billion. So in essence, compared to our peers, whether in Africa or in other parts of the world, what we are budgeting is peanuts. That means we have a huge revenue challenge. And when that revenue challenge is coupled with the way we spend, which is not properly targeted, then a bigger challenge crystallizes, which is that the budget is somehow delinked from plans and policies to have the budget continue, which we've always treasured, because the budget is the second most important instrument of governance after the Constitution. So have many experts and scholars posited. So that, in a nutshell, is the summary of what you have about the 2024 federal budget proposals.
I'm just going to follow up with a question now. I mean, when you look at the budget, you realize that just like you have also highlighted in the last 4 minutes, you have Nigerians who have also been equally concerned. The question is, why does it seem, or as it now is, I mean, practically difficult for us to implement budgets? Can we blame that entirely on what experts have called over-reliance on monies from crude oil?
No, it's about the revenue challenge. We've not been able to raise enough revenue, one, and secondly, to properly account for extant and existing revenue. It's not even about reliance on oil and gas. We've not fully expounded the frontiers of getting all the resources from that sector. You know, I've always advocated that today, the easiest way we can raise money for the 3 tiers of government to share the federation account or foreign exchange for us to show up the value of the naira is to expound the frontiers of the oil and gas industry. One, if you look at DEMTEF, it was posited that the reasons why we are not getting so much from crude oil or why we are not digging up so much is that there is insecurity, there is pipeline vandalization, and there is a theft of the crude oil. And then they also talked about underinvestment in the sector over the years. Now, pipeline vandalization, stopping it is not rocket science. Stopping the theft of crude oil is not rocket science. You know the number of agencies we have oversighting this. We have the Navy, we have the Army, we have the Air Force, we have NIMASA. We even have private security militia, we have the police, we have NCDC. So there's quite a lot that could be done for us to raise more money from that. And we are discussing about 300,000 to 400,000 barrels of crude oil being lost a day. And what I'm saying in essence that if we can even go beyond this 500,000 that is lost, to set a target to say we must do 2.5, 3 million barrels a day, because the crude oil is an asset that in the next 10 years will become a wasted asset, because so many countries have put a date on when they will no longer use the internal combustion engine. Okay, because of climate change challenges, they have set date for emission zero. And what it means is that very soon this oil will be wasted. So it is important that we dig it up now and use it to shore up other critical sectors of the economy, build up our reserves, invest in infrastructure, so that by the time it is no longer so relevant, then we can move on. So beyond that, even the taxation, whether it's VAT, whether it's income tax, whether it's companies income tax, you discover that at the end of the day, Nigeria is not fully accounting for all that is due. There is evidence that most of the money is being pilfered by those who are supposed to pay, and the collecting authorities. They've not introduced enough technology to automate the system. We heard that 1.8 trillion was lost last year due to waivers. We have issue of tax expenditure, waivers for the customs, which is money we are waiving to say, oh, come and invest in our country, come and do this, you create jobs, you bring in new technology, you show up the value, you make profits and then pay this thing. So we have been waiving money. Every year we've been forfeiting about 6 trillion in tax expenditure, which should have come into the treasury if we have done the right and proper thing. So we are not over-relying on crude oil and gas. At the same time, we've not fully gotten what we should get from that sector. Other sectors where money should be coming, we have mismanaged them in such a way that we are not getting sufficient revenue to fund our budget.
Okay, that doesn't seem like a very inspiring analysis there, but of course, it is backed by facts, no doubt about that. In August, JP Morgan had brought out, there was this piece of news saying that Nigeria going forward would, we're looking at raising some $17 billion from sales of public assets. Of course, you and I know this is not the first time the government, the federal government in particular, will go in that direction. Is that a desperate move, or is it another knee-jerk approach?
Well, whether you call it sale of assets or privatization, we have a lot of assets that have been wasted over the years and that have constituted a drain on the public treasury. For instance, the refineries, there's a probe going on in the National Assembly today saying in the last 7-8 years, we've wasted over 10 trillion or 11 trillion in turnaround maintenance of the refineries. And what has happened? Those refineries have never been turned around, and only the pockets of the turnaround experts have been turned around. So since you have refineries, you are paying staff, you are maintaining huge bills, and it's producing nothing. So they should be privatized, properly so-called, not about selling them off or saying you just selling. Privatization in this context means you get individuals or companies that have the technical capacity, that have the managerial capacity, and that have the financial capacity to really turn around those refineries and start producing and refining crude at home, so that we can not stop importation of refined products. So they will keep maintaining staff, creating jobs, and at the end of the year, pay tax, corporate income tax, and then they will add value to the Nigerian economy. So that's one. There may also be other assets like that which may need to be privatized. The privatization I'm talking of is not giving it to strawmen, political cronies who know nothing about refining, who will simply do what is called asset stripping, find important parts of those machineries, sell them off, make their money because they bought them for peanuts, and move on. So that's not the kind of stuff I'm talking about. So I support on a case-by-case basis that we privatize and even concession some of these public assets that are a drain on the treasury, and get some money to get our economy back on the ground. So I fully support that, but it depends on the particular asset. And it's not a question of seeing an asset that is worth, like, say, $5 or $6 billion. At the end of the day, you go and sell it for 250 million, sell it for peanuts, and then they simply do asset stripping and scrap the particular industry. So that's not my idea, but I support on a case-by-case basis the privatization and concessioning, and where possible, if the facts and evidence support, outright sale of some of these assets.
The federal government has told us multiple times in the last few months that worst case scenario by the end of this year, at least one refinery, preferably or most likely the one in Port Harcourt, will be up and running in full capacity. Is that promising enough?
No. What I'm saying, yes, get it up and running. And then when you get it up and running, you do not have the capacity to continuously run it in a profitable manner. Get those who have that capacity to take it over and run it, whether even if it is concession, in a profitable manner, so that we don't need to go back to the treasury. This is a business, for heaven's sake. And we have deregulated that sector. People are now paying the real price of the cost of petrol or diesel or everything. So you can no longer be running such a business where you are supposed to make profit. And then when a small part of the equipment or machinery spoils, the original owner, which is the government, now puts money into his pocket, brings out money from his pocket to go and service it. So what I'm saying is that we run it in a proper commercial and for profit basis, where we don't need to bring subsidies again to put into the refinery. So I'm happy it can get on board by December, but thereafter, you privatize or concession. And as the other ones are fixed, you also do the same.
Let me bundle two questions into one real quick. The NNPC, as we knew it, the conventional NNPC, had been unbundled not too long ago. So it is now more like something that runs on a private sector model. That's one. I don't know how much you think that has changed the narrative for the better with regards to our oil and gas sector. The second is when the Dangote refinery was launched, was inaugurated by the former president Muhammadu Buhari, and we were told by July it will be operational full stream. Of course, we know that's never happened until a matter of days ago. Do you think the Dangote refinery element in this conversation it's going to compensate for the gap that has been left by the inefficiency, or what some people have called the ineptitude of the NNPC?
I don't think so. The Dangote refinery is a different kettle of fish. And of course, we are told an NPC now owns about 20% of the shares. The fact that you have one asset, although not a national asset, which the federal government owns 20% and is working well, does not mean you should simply ignore your other assets. So in essence, we need to bring the other refineries back on stream. If between them, all of the four refineries and the Dangote refineries, we are producing enough for the local market, nothing stops us from exporting. At least we start from other West African and African countries. And there will be that comparative advantage that the cost of freight or whatever that we may be reduced if they have to buy from us. So in essence, what I'm saying is that it doesn't in any way compensate. My recommendations are valid, whether Dangote comes on board or not. So, but I'm saying it is a good omen that Dangote is coming on board. Why don't we have surplus and begin to export to end that foreign exchange, which we so critically need, to pay for the backlog of those who are owing their foreign exchange they need to repatriate, and also to be able to buy raw materials. You see that companies are closing shop and leaving Nigeria because the current macroeconomic environment, access to foreign exchange in particular, is no longer favoring them. We need to show up the value of the Naira. If we begin to earn enough foreign exchange, there's nothing that says that the dollar cannot become 400 to 500 Naira. It was in the last couple of years, or even go lower than that if we have sufficient funding in our forex. So in essence, it doesn't, the two are not tradable. The two of them must come on board. Dangote needs to come on board, and all NNPC refineries need to come on board.
Let's look away from oil for a minute, AZ. Let's talk about the solid mineral sector. Just this week, Dr. Dele Alake was, he appeared before a committee of the House of Representatives. He talked about a lot of things, including how that he would want the 25 billion naira earmarked for his ministry in the 2024 appropriation to be scaled up to 250, because he says the ministry needs that much to be able to do so much. in that industry, turn it around and be able to, if you like, give oil a run for its money. But there's something I want to highlight for you, and I'd like your response to it. He said the reason we have illegal mining in the sector is that you have powerful Nigerians, influential Nigerians, who are exploiting that sector. I mean, this is not the first time we're hearing about powerful Nigerians being in the mineral sector. Help us make sense of this whole narrative.
Well, that sector is one where we can generate more resources if properly managed. In the first place, what comes from that sector to the federation account or to the federal government is peanuts. It's a joke. In no year has it, in the last 10 years, has it exceeded 5 billion for the traitors of government to share. So we know as a fact that it is true that very influential Nigerians have been running that sector for their private benefit. And this is one of those things that some of us are worried about. We had a mining law which was championed by the former minister Obi Ezekwesili in 2007. And since then, government after government, minister after minister have been paying lip service to the full implementation of that law. So the mining business itself is going to be done by the private sector and not by a government agency like an NPC. Even an NPC model, we have jettisoned it and said, well, yes, government still owns bulk of the shares, but operates as a limited liability company. I do not see the reason why Dr. Lake will need 250 billion, okay, to be able to do this, because that's a humongous amount of money. Unless he's tying it to an investment plan where there will be a performance measurement plan and deliverables, not to take 250 billion. After you've taken it, what are you delivering? So he should be able to tell us and tell Nigerians concretely to say, yes, give me 250 billion. By the end of the year or in the next year, you'll be able to deliver 3 trillion, 4 trillion into the federation account for sharing by the traitors of government. Remember, these minerals are supposed not to be minerals belonging to the state or local government or individual, just like the way we've also treated revenues accruing from our oil. This is money for the whole federation. And I perfectly agree that even some of the challenges, security challenges in the northern part of the country, it's been reported in the media that some of them are engineered by local and foreign interests who are mining these minerals illegally. Therefore, they engineer all kinds of violence and insecurity because they know that if everywhere is properly governed and secure, they will be called to order. And that's where they can begin to talk of the mine police, working in collaboration with the regular police, working in collaboration with the DSS and other security agencies. And then, of course, with even if it is the Nigerian Air Force, can help with reconnaissance, maps from the air about what is happening where, if they all come together to work, because this shouldn't be people working in silos, because the issue of security, this is also part of the security we need. Livelihood security, economic security, because if we have more resources, we can be able to take care of our children who are out of school. We can be able to take care of more of the education, health, housing, and standards of living and create employment for the majority of the youths who are out there waiting to be enlisted into terror groups or groups that will subvert Nigeria. So I perfectly agree, and more needs to be done, but the minister must give us a roadmap and a plan that is bound with deliverables and promise us that if he doesn't deliver, we should sanction him, or we should resign, or he should be prosecuted. Then I will support that. But to simply move from 25 to 250 billion, that would be ridiculous.
Let's talk about infrastructure. Every other year, of course, that's a very pivotal element in capital expenditure. Every other year, we see so much of money going into infrastructure. We understand that Ministry of Works is now asking for about 1.5 trillion from this 27.5 trillion overall budget proposal. Have we been able to tie infrastructure development to economic growth, to economic deliverables for our people beyond just making roads and a handful of bridges here and there?
Well, we have not successfully done that, first of all, because the stock of infrastructure in roads, bridges, schools, hospitals, power sector we need, we've not been able to get that quantum in place. And the few that we are doing are not properly planned and structured in such a way to generate economic growth. For instance, look at the railway sector, where we invested a lot of money in the last couple of years. Yes, Lagos to Ibadan, it makes sense. Abuja, Kaduna, it makes sense. Kaduna, Kano, it makes sense. But the railway that was supposed to go from Katsina or thereabout and end into Niger Republic, what about the Eastern Corridor? The railway that starts from Port Harcourt and heads up to the southeast. From the southeast, it enters the Middle Belt, from there, the northeast, and ends up in Maiduguri, okay, the other end. The others are standard gauge, and you are saying, okay, go and rehabilitate the old narrow gauge. Where is the cost-benefit analysis in terms of the input of these railways to the Nigerian economy? Why you should prioritize a railway to know we are starting in Katsina or thereabout and heading to Jibia in whatever country, whether it's Niger or thereabout. So we must sit down and stop the ethnic and religious politics we are playing and marginalization of a certain group of people to think in the national interest of how we can use these investments in the infrastructure to grow the economy. And then also, seaports are not supposed to be in Lagos alone. Let's get the right drafts. Let's rehabilitate. Let's make sure that all the seaports across the country, from the Port Harcourt one to the Warri, down to Calabar, we get them functional and working. We don't have to congest one particular part of the country and then leave others, okay? So it is about being creative, one. It is about thinking in the national interest, not about leadership, ministers and presidents who think we are from this zone, we are from that zone. That's why Nigeria is not making progress. So until we begin to think in a patriotic manner as Nigerians, not dividing what we are doing in terms of where we think we come from, we'll continue to run around in circles. Secondly, we've not been able to galvanize some of the elements, okay, that will help us to unlock the stock of wealth that we will need to use to build up our infrastructure. Look at the housing and the land sector. We need land reforms. We have a presidential committee on land reforms, which is talking about unlocking over 200 billion in land assets, which have been made dead simply because of the Land Use Act and the way we have done business over the years. So they are saying, let's rejig the Land Use Act. Let's make sure we give secure titles, legal titles, security of tenure across board to that man in one remote village in Imo State or Maiduguri or wherever who has land, or in Sokoto, so that that land can begin to, you can securitize and use to get into a bank to say, I have this 10 hectares of land, is worth 100 million, and you can get access to credit. Look at the housing sector. The National Housing Fund, how it's been so mismanaged since the Babangida days in 1992, the law was enacted. The stock of wealth in housing and land a nation has contributes a lot to its growth and to its GDP. So much can be done. Look at even in the case of savings. You need to have savings. What about 30% of your GDP for you to be able to grow your infrastructure and grow your economy consistently? Today, what is the ratio of our savings to the GDP? It's less than that. But we are discouraging savings. If you go and save your money in a bank today, you can hardly get 10 or 12%. You turn around to borrow, they tell you to bring 30, 31%. Meanwhile, the monetary policy rate is at 18. Inflation rate is over 27. So if you put your money in the bank and get 10%, when the inflation rate is 27%, you are simply sanctioned and punished for saving. So there is no encouragement to save, and we've not thought it through to begin to put a corridor, a symmetric corridor between the deposit rate and the credit rate. So there's so much that can be done to unlock resources, to unlock the revenue, for us to begin to properly invest in the infrastructure that is relevant for job creation and for economic growth, to put us where our peers have been or currently are. But we are not doing that in this country.
Eze Onyenkpere, Executive Director, Center for Social Justice, will say thank you for joining us on Business Point today.
My pleasure.
And that's a wrap. That's a wrap on Business Point, everyone. Thank you for watching. We'll see you again tomorrow. I'm William Mofwegwe.